Alright, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to give you my top 10 cryptid legends from the Canadian Maritime provinces. And you probably know this, but in case you don't, a cryptid is an animal, creature, or entity of folklore and mythology whose existence has not yet been proven. And I just find that no matter where you fall on the spectrum of belief regarding these creatures, digging into these legends can be an interesting way of learning about an area's history and mythology. I've already done Canadian cryptid videos for all of the provinces from BC to Quebec, and in this one I'm going to cover some of the legends in the Maritime provinces: New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland Labrador. I've compiled a list of my personal top 10 legends from this area. There are definitely some that I didn't get to in this video, but this is just a collection of legends that I find really interesting from this region of Canada. And as a quick note before I get started, if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing to my channel. I typically upload something new at least once a week. And I'm going to jump right into the list. So to start things off, at number 1 is the legendary Gougou of Miscou Island, New Brunswick. So the Gougou is an old Mi'kmaq legend. The Mi'kmaq are a large First Nations group that is present across the Atlantic provinces of Canada and parts of the northeastern US. According to a Mi'kmaq legend going back centuries, there was a massive ogress, which is a female ogre, living on Miscou Island in northeastern New Brunswick in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There's a famous story involving this creature and prominent French explorer Samuel de Champlain when he was exploring Canada. In 1603, Champlain was exploring the Maritimes and he had his ship anchored off of Miscou Island. He learned about legends of this Gougou, that it took the form of a woman but it was very terrible, and that the creature would capture and eat local Mi'kmaq. Champlain would send a team to explore this island and they would soon return in fear, claiming that they heard this terrible monster. Exactly 300 years later in 1903, prominent Canadian botanist, historian, and cartographer William Francis Ganong surveyed the entirety of Miscou Island and claimed that he never heard the sound. But to this day, the ogress of Miscou Island remains one of Canada's oldest cryptid legends. At number 2 is the famous awag of St. John, New Brunswick. This is a creature that is said to be 30 meters long, and it appears to be half salmon and half seal. According to local legends, the awag lives in caves beneath the surface at the reversing falls of West St. John. The awag is said to appear to people in the springtime when the moon is full and the tide is out. This is an image of the awag by artist Isabel MacArthur that used to sit on the wall of the Reversing Falls trading post in the 1950s. Some sources say that this is an old Inuit legend dating back to the Champlain era. Modern stories of the awag started circulating in the 1950s. In one of the stories, a diver was exploring the falls, and when he surfaced, he was completely panicked and his hair had turned white. He refused to talk about what he saw, but he would die soon after this. There's another story of a man who died in nearby Lawler Lake, and his body was found weeks later on a limestone ledge at Reversing Falls. There are also stories of hunters in this area spotting a strange amphibian creature that follows in the wake of fish. This creature is also said to be comfortable both in the water and on land. The awag of New Brunswick has been featured in children's books, and it was also the subject of a live-action animated children's series on TV. And it very much remains one of the most well-known cryptid legends in the Maritimes. At number 3 is the Lake Utopia monster, otherwise known as Old Ned. This creature is supposedly located in Lake Utopia, which is in the far southern portion of New Brunswick. It is said to be a bulky 20-foot-long lake monster with a reddish-brown or dark red color. There's a prominent local First Nation story where 2 people were canoeing on the lake and they ended up being chased the entire length of the 7-kilometer lake by this monster. In 1867, sawmill workers on Lake Utopia claimed that they saw a creature that was 30 feet long and 10 feet wide, much bulkier and wider than the traditional sea serpent legend you find in a lot of lakes. A Harper's Weekly article from October of 1868 said that a massive monster was killed in Passamaquoddy Bay, linking it to Lake Utopia. This mysterious sea serpent had a dorsal fin and a flat tail, and this article included a really interesting picture of this creature, which appears to be a massive shark with dog-like legs. William Francis Ganong, who I just mentioned investigated the Gougou of Miscou Island in 1903, would interview people around Lake Utopia in 1888, and these people claimed to have had regular sightings of Old Ned. Cryptozoologist Norma Stewart claims that the last sighting reported to her was in 2000, and she believes that this creature travels between Lake Utopia and the Atlantic Ocean every 3 to 5 years. Many people have hypothesized that Old Ned is really an oarfish or a giant eel. Lake Utopia also has many limestone tunnels and deep canals, which could be used as a hiding place for large creatures in this lake. And so there haven't been a ton of modern sightings, but I do find the picture in that Harper's Weekly article particularly interesting, and Old Ned of Lake Utopia remains a popular cryptid legend. At number 4 is the green hill creature of Nova Scotia. This is said to be a large, hairy, bipedal creature inhabiting the Green Hill area of Pictou County. This legend goes back quite a few years. There was an article in the Thorburn Post from August 15th of 1913 in which Mrs. Irvin McKay of Marsh Road outside of Thorburn reported encountering this creature. Quote, "There's something evil out there, something big and shadowy, and it scares the bejeebers out of me," end quote. This article describes a big monster that raids chicken coops, steals milk from cows, and leaves footprints at least 15 inches long. According to local legends, this creature would appear every 50 years and stick around for a year or two. There was a well-known encounter in 2003. Miles McKenzie and his school track team were doing sprint exercises on the wooded eastern side of Green Hill when all of a sudden everything went completely quiet, and everyone in this group said this was extremely eerie. All of a sudden the boys heard a blood-curdling and deafening roar and ran out of this area. Miles McKenzie's father was with the group at the time, and he also reported hearing this noise. The boys felt that this creature was chasing them out of this area. It completely terrified them, and they would report this story to local media. Another group was in this area camping, and they all reported the feeling of being watched and having a very scary feeling in this area, and they also talked about hearing a large creature running through the woods. Now, most people think that the Green Hill creature is really a Bigfoot or Sasquatch, a cryptid that is most commonly associated with the Pacific Northwest, but in reality this thing is seen right across North America from the Pacific to the Atlantic. In previous videos I've talked about the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and they have compiled reports of several Bigfoot sightings in the Maritimes going back to 1983, with the most recent being in 2021. I read a really interesting report from 1990, and this took place at the Canadian Forces Base at Gagetown in New Brunswick. Apparently a group of more than 20 Canadian and US soldiers heard and felt the impact of a large creature running through the woods. They said it had a loud scream that sounded like a baby, but 500 times louder and very distorted. According to these seasoned soldiers, this event completely terrified them, and it's become a bit of a legend in maritime mythology. And so most people think that the Green Hill creature of Nova Scotia is some sort of Bigfoot, and with other prominent sightings of this cryptid across Atlantic Canada, I definitely consider this to be one of the top 10 legendary creatures of the Maritimes. At number 5 is the Cape Sable Serpent. This is a creature that has been seen around Cape Sable Island off the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia. This creature is said to be over 50 feet long, with a head resembling a wild boar, 2 very long and prominent front teeth, and a vertical segmented tail. Sightings of the Cape Sable Serpent started in 1976. At least 5 separate fishermen had encounters with a strange beast that they had never seen before. It started off on July 5th of 1976. A man named Eisner Penny was fishing near Cape Sable and spotted a massive creature that at first he thought was some sort of whale. However, as he approached this creature, he soon realized that it was not like any whale he had ever seen before. As he was moving closer, he said this thing rose about 14 to 15 feet out of the water, which completely scared him, and he would speed away in his boat quickly. Shortly after this, a man named Keith Ross and his 24-year-old son Rodney were anchored in foggy waters off of Pollock's Ledge when they both saw this creature. This is a quote from Keith Ross. Quote, "I've never seen nothing like it in my life. It was like something out of this world, a very frightful thing." Keith Ross's son Rodney also saw this creature, and he said that this thing appeared to have barnacles all over his neck. He said it had bloodshot eyes as big as saucers, and that the eyes were on stalks that protruded from its head. Rodney also made the comment that this creature resembled something like a giant seahorse. A couple nights later, fisherman Edgar Nickerson and his 15-year-old son Robert heard a massive creature next to their boat. This is a quote from Edgar Nickerson. Quote, "It kept coming and coming. It was a horrible thing. I tell you, if there's a devil, that was it." End quote. I couldn't find any more recent sightings, but the Cape Sable Serpent continues to live on in Nova Scotia and maritime mythology. Okay, at number 6 on the list is the Gabarus Mermaid. Gabarus is a small community on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia. The mermaid is a prominent cryptid in different maritime cultures around the world, although it seems like it's not as strongly associated with Canada. However, in 1886, a group of fishermen in Gabarus reported seeing a mermaid. They said that this thing had the face, head, shoulders, and arms of a human, but that the lower extremities had the appearance of a fish. They also said that this mermaid had long dark hair that resembled a horse's mane, and that the fingers on one of its hands was very long. This was one of the first prominent mermaid sightings in Canada. I couldn't find any further sightings around Gabarus, but there were other mermaid sightings reported around the same time, near Victoria, BC on the other side of the country. Mermaid sightings definitely aren't reported as much in modern times. This certainly seems to be much more of a legend of the past. However, to this day, the community of Gabarus still leans into this mermaid legend, and I thought that this was definitely one of the more unique cryptid myths in the Maritimes. At number 7 on the list is the Wiglatmooge, or the Little People of Mi'kmaq legend. Mythology surrounding little people is also present in other parts of Canada, but it seems much more prominent on the East Coast. The Wiglatmooge, or Little People, are said to be tiny people that possess magical powers. They are said to live in the wilderness, everywhere from forests and caves to mountaintops. Other legends say that these little people actually live in a vast underground kingdom. They are said to be generally benign and they rarely harm people, although they are known to play tricks. There are stories of these little people braiding the tail and hair of hunters' horses and knocking over piles of wood. There are way too many individual stories to list. This is a very prominent legend across the Maritimes. But if you're really interested in doing a deep dive on little people, Hammerson Peters has done some excellent in-depth videos on this subject, and I definitely recommend those if you're really interested in this specific topic. At number 8 is the infamous sluagh of Prince Edward Island. The sluagh is described as a swirling mass of dark, ominous blackbirds with glowing red eyes. They are said to emerge from the wilderness, particularly at twilight, to carry away souls. The sluagh is said to be a host of restless spirits, the souls of the dead that are deemed unworthy of entering the afterlife, and who are forever condemned to roam the earth. I found this one to be interesting as it was the first myth that I came across that involves an entire group of creatures rather than a single entity. And although it originates in Celtic folklore of Ireland and Scotland, the sluagh is one of the best known creature legends in Prince Edward Island. At number 9 is Cressie, the creature of Crescent Lake near Robert's Arm in Newfoundland and Labrador. The name Cressie comes from Nessie, the Loch Ness monster in Scotland. Cressie is said to be a long, dark brown creature about 15 feet long with a fish-like head. There were reported sightings going back to the 1950s, but this creature is linked to even earlier indigenous legends of a pond devil or swimming demon in this lake. An elderly resident of Robert's Arm named Grandmother Anthony was startled half to death one day by seeing a giant serpent in the lake while she was berry picking. In one of the earliest dated sightings in the 1950s, 2 woodsmen were on the shores of the lake when they saw what they thought was an upturned boat. Fearing for the occupants of this boat that could be in the water, they hurried to this object, but as they approached it, they noticed that it turned out to be a large creature, and as they moved closer, it disappeared under the surface of the lake. In spring of 1990, a local resident reported seeing a slim black shape rise 5 feet from a patch of churning water before sinking out of sight. In June of 1991, a man named Fred Parsons and his wife reported seeing a large snake-like creature in the lake. They said it had a long, sleek body with a large head, and that as it was moving across the surface of the lake, it was staying level with the water. A couple months later, in September of 1991, another resident was returning to town and saw a black 15-foot-long shape emerge from the lake, and then pitch forward in a rolling motion, much like a whale does, but with no sign of a fin as a whale typically has. This creature then sank out of sight and disappeared. That year, the town of Robert's Arm erected a statue of Cressie at the entrance of the community, with a sign and storyboard describing alleged sightings. Robert's Arm has really leaned into this legend over the years, partially with the hopes of boosting tourism and the local economy, much like how Okanagan Lake has embraced the Ogopogo. There were several more sightings in 1995, and in the year 2000, a summer student crew that was working on a boardwalk along the lake also spotted this monster. In summer of 2003, there were many more sightings. A passenger in a passing car shouted at their driver after seeing a monster surface from the lake. They said that water poured from the creature's mouth and that it was about 20 feet long. They also said that this creature swam silently across the top of the lake before finally submerging and disappearing from view. Many people theorize that Cressie is actually a giant eel, and over time many large eels have been found in this lake. There's a story from the 1980s in which a pilot in a small plane crashed and drowned in the lake. Divers attempted to retrieve the body, and they were attacked by a school of uncommonly large eels. Others speculate that sightings of Cressie are actually caused by a line of northern river otters. And so there's always a debate over the origin of these cryptid legends, but Cressie remains one of the most prominent creature myths in the Maritimes. And at number 10 to close out this list are the Fairies of Newfoundland. Now, fairies are a common legend in the folklore of English, Scottish, and Irish cultures, and it seems like they brought these stories with them when they settled in Atlantic Canada. According to these legends, fairies can take on various appearances. They will sometimes appear as children, adults, glowing lights, or even animals. They are said to sometimes hit people with a fairy blast which causes injury, and then strange stuff will come out of the wound, such as sticks, balls of wool, or even fish bones. Beyond general mischief, fairies are also said to kidnap people, and they have been blamed for many disappearances over the years. Parents would commonly warn children about the fairies and tell them not to wander too far into the wilderness. Some traditional protections or charms against fairies include carrying a piece of bread in your pocket or wearing a piece of clothing inside out. Legends also state that if you happen to come across a fairy in the wild, despite your precautions, you're supposed to stay silent and not indicate that you've seen them. And these fairy legends exist throughout Canada, but they are particularly prominent in Newfoundland, and they are strongly associated with that province. They have many parallels with the Little People of First Nations mythology, but I personally consider them to be a distinct legend, and this tradition of Celtic fairies has continued to live on in Canada. And that's going to wrap up this video. Again, I didn't mention every single cryptid legend that is present in the Maritimes. This is just my personal top 10 list of some of the legends in Atlantic Canada that I find particularly interesting. I'd also love to hear back from residents of the Maritimes. Please leave your comments on the cryptids that I've talked about, and it would be really interesting to hear about people's personal experiences and potential sightings from that area of Canada. If you got some value out of this one, you might enjoy some of the other Canadian cryptid videos that I've posted. And I'm also going to be doing another video on Canada's cryptid legends from the Northern Territories. I hope you found this one interesting and informative, and if you haven't already, then please consider subscribing to my channel. I typically upload something new at least once a week, and I have many more videos coming out this year. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee, and there's a link to that below. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Strange North channel.